This is the Investor Connect podcast program. I'm Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of this show in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, family offices, private equity, and many other investors for early stage and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today I'm here with Pierre Rogers of Yahyn. Pierre, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So we talked previously about Puro Trader, and you since had a spin-off, Yahyn. Can you tell us more about what you've done there?
Certainly. So we took the lessons that we learned from Puro Trader, and we had always thought about extending from rare and premium cigars and moving into two additional verticals, whiskey and wine. And due to some regulatory changes, it became very clear to us that wine was really the market for us. We had industry knowledge. The regulatory environment around wine had loosened up. However, it hadn't done so on the tobacco and whiskey side. And frankly, the total addressable market of wine is significantly larger than the other two. As a matter of fact, it's almost 100x larger, just to give that a number. So that really made a lot of sense for us to take the lessons that we learned and apply them to this market that, frankly, is still fairly antiquated when it comes to a digital footprint.
Well, great. So what led you to start working in this direction as a change to what you were doing before?
Really, it comes down to an extension of what we were doing before. So when you look at from a marketing cohort standpoint, so who's your end user, who's your end consumer, the parallels are very, very similar. But within wine, we got to bolt on some additional groups. So we felt like we had a ton of experience with selling into some of these groups. And more importantly, we knew that we have a lot of regulatory master processes over here. So with highly restricted brands like tobacco and spirits, alcohol, you really have to be a regulatory master. And frankly, we've mastered those skills over the last few years. And we felt that we could apply this to the wine market. Now, what might surprise you in the Internet of Things, where the Internet has disrupted positively virtually every industry, right? From transportation via Uber and Lyft to hospitality via Airbnb, and then mattresses via Casper. Interestingly enough, wine has really not been disrupted the way that those other industries have been. As a matter of fact, only 5% of wine in the United States is actually currently sold online, which is a strikingly low number. Most people are kind of startled to hear it's that low. And what we've seen between millennials really getting on board, they tend to be much more digital, and their buying habits tend to be more digital. So we're seeing a percentage increase that is double digits per year, although we're coming off a very, very low number, which, look, if you're an entrepreneur and an investor, that's a really sexy thing. That's a really good thing. You don't want to be in a super saturated market, number one. But number two, without being too brash, due to the seismic shift that we've had because of the coronavirus of COVID-19, there's been this massive fundamental change in buying habits through all demographics. And we were just lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time, where we're capturing a lot of that right now. Let me give you a small example. We have on the platform sort of two buckets. On one bucket, we have merchants. These are vineyards and retailers that produce and or sell wine. On the other side, we have users, right? These are buyers, people like you and I that would go to a website to buy the wine that we're looking for. On the merchant side, there's a cost of customer acquisition, and on the buyer side, there's a cost of customer acquisition. This is true for any platform, vis-a-vis Airbnb, Lyft, Uber, etc. For us, due to the seismic shift that we just experienced, our merchant customer acquisition costs just dropped to zero, right? We literally have merchants, vineyards that are traditionally rely on foot traffic, tasting rooms, etc., that are now closed for all intents and purposes. They're zero. And now there's this massive rush to get to digital. And we could talk more about that sort of in detail later, but it has been an interesting shift that we're there to capture that.
Well, great. So how many sellers do you have on the platform now?
So right now we have a queue of 1,700 sellers, and that number is set to increase by about 5x if our data is right over the next 30 days. Just to give you an idea of what that means, If you walk into your average wine shop is going to have somewhere between 750 and 1,500 SKUs, right? So different bottles of wine. We already have close to 4,000 SKUs. So we are more than double already from an inventory perspective compared to your brick and mortar spot. When we integrate just a third of our queue of sellers, we will have the largest inventory of wine anywhere in the planet. Full stop will have a low number would be 20 to 50,000 SKUs, right? And so this is very common things, common wine that most people are used to buying from, the sort of Rombauer Chardonnays to name drop, to very small batch, very obscure and hard to obtain stuff. It'll all be there. And that gives us tremendous power in the marketplace.
So how many users do you have on the platform at this point?
So right now, our community is just a touch over 400,000 and growing.
Well, that's great. So we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and many cities are locked down and people are moving online and so forth. So how are you able to help in this COVID-19 world?
Certainly. So that can be broken down to two answers. So if you're a small business owner, vineyard or wine shop, this is a way for you to continue sales and actually ramp up your sales in this market as you are no longer getting foot traffic. The way our company is structured, the way our model is structured for those retailers and vineyards, entry onto our platform is zero. We make the barrier of entry very, very low, which attracts a lot of retailers. And so we can actually be selective on that side on who we let onto the platform so that our users have the best experience. So for them, it makes a lot of sense, right? They're highly incentivized to come to our platform because there's low barrier of entry. We integrate into their platform in real time through a custom API built for them. We now sell their inventory in real time onto the platform. They get to wake up every morning and come in and fulfill orders, right? Now that foot traffic has effectively stopped in many places. On the other side of things, the user base, guys and gals like you and I, who are sitting at home and you're trying to self-quarantine and what have you, who still want to live a normal life and have a nice bottle of wine from time to time, now it's only a click of a button away. And you can find virtually any bottle of wine that you'll ever would come across in any of your local wine shops, from the broad-based stuff that you might find at a Costco to the really boutique-y stuff that you might find at a wine store. You're going to be able to find all of that at the lowest price because you have so many different competitors competing for your business. So that makes a really great model from the user perspective. They get what they're looking for, right? So you have that inventory discovery, but more importantly, you also have price discovery, right? You have multiple people selling the same commodity, which means the price must adjust. So it puts the user in a really powerful position. They're home and safe, number one, but number two, they can find what they're looking for, their bottle of wine, always, and they can find it for the best price.
Well, with that many users and sellers on the platform, you need to have a fairly robust platform. Can you describe a little bit about the technology behind the platform you're using?
Certainly. So it took quite some time to develop. We're built from the ground up on Ruby on Rails. We are hosted up on AWS like so many great companies that are out there. I tell you that because it gives us the ability to scale very rapidly, which is extremely important. On the back end of that, we built in a machine learning algorithm. And when you think about one of the challenges that we have as a platform, when you, the user, go and buy a bottle of wine on our platform, we, Yahyn, do not control that bottle of wine, right? So if you as a user pick a bottle of wine that doesn't really suit you, isn't quite necessarily quite to your palate, you have a bad or less optimal experience, that can impact our business. And yet we have difficulty controlling that. So what we do in order to A, increase sales, but B, and far more importantly, surprise and delight our customers, is we use a machine learning algorithm that every time you, the user, purchase, we take the tasting notes. Now, this is in the background, right? So you as a customer are never going to see this. We take the tasting notes from the vineyard and the top critics. We break those down. And based on your buying habits, we can then recommend to you wines that are within your palate and taste profile. Now, that's very, very unique and is quite sophisticated. And we can talk a lot more about palate and how it breaks down. Many people will tell you that taste is subjective. That's actually not that true. Some of taste is subjective, but if I put a pinch of salt on 100 people's tongues, they would say it's salty. If I took a pinch of sugar and did the same exercise, they would say it's sweet. You can do that with bitter and sour. And those are sort of your four boxes, your four walls, if you will, when it comes to taste. And then you work in from there. So taste isn't nearly as subjective as people believe that it is or have come to believe that it is. And because of that, we use what top critics, not what our opinion is, but top critics like James Suckling, Robert Parker, Wine Spectator, et cetera, have said about that wine based against what you have already purchased. We then identify those key tastes that you have a preference for. That way, each and every one of those recommendations that we put in front of you to remarket to you and create a high RR, you, the customer, are surprised and delighted. And that's really critical in terms of our recurring revenue, the likelihood you are a returning user, and frankly, that you recommend to other people. And so that's a bit of our secret sauce.
Well, it sounds like a compelling technology case for sure. So now that you're working in this new wine sector here for you, what surprised you most about it? What did you not realize before you got in?
The biggest thing that I didn't realize when getting into this is that wine stores in particular and vineyards, both, are predominantly owned and run by immigrants. And this is really, really interesting, as it tends to be one of these businesses or one of these sectors that attract the American dream, if I could put too fine a point on it. So immigrants come from around the world and they come to the United States and they start businesses. They tend to be very entrepreneurial. Wine stores tends to be one of those businesses. What we've seen in our data is a minimum of 60% of both wine stores and vineyards are owned and operated by immigrants. And actually, in certain cities that have a higher concentration of immigrants, so New York, Toledo, Ohio, believe it or not, Berkeley, California, Los Angeles, and major markets, it's 90%. 90% is such a huge number. So one of the things that we didn't realize is that there's actually a huge social impact piece here as well, because the cost associated for anyone to launch a proper e-commerce website to sell wine, specifically when you have state and federal guidelines and mandates that you have to work through, you have permitting issues, you have payment processing, which is extremely difficult when you're talking about this sector. You've got marketing, age verification. There's a big burden there. And that burden on average costs $30,000 to $50,000 minimum in order for you to build a proper basic e-commerce wine site. And for many immigrants who might not be as tech savvy and or just don't have the extra $50,000 lying around to enter into that market, it can be a big hurdle. For Yahyn, the integration cost is zero, right? So they instantly, we go to them, we build an API for them into their inventory, and off they go. And now they have a digital presence and are selling online. So they come into work come Monday morning, they've got 10, 15, 1,000 orders to fulfill. And that's what they end up doing. So they end up entering this digital market with a very low entry point. So it's been fascinating to see this social impact component unfold, but frankly, we hadn't expected.
Well, it sounds like a great opportunity for that group of people as well. And what's your advice for people investing in this space? What do you tell them about this that they may not realize?
The biggest one is how young this space is from a technology perspective, right? So wine's been around for centuries, but how wine is distributed in the United States, especially after the regulatory changes that happened in 2016 and 2017, the vast majority of people do not understand that this market is quite ripe for change, right? Again, only 5% of wine is sold online. This is nearly $100 billion annual market in the United States alone. So from a total addressable market standpoint, it is massive. From a digital footprint in that TAM, it is quite small. And as an investor, that's what you're looking for, right? You've seen the power of the internet. You've seen the power of platforms attack everything from mattresses to transportation. And yet you have this industry, which is enormous, which by all intents and purposes really hasn't been penetrated in the startup sort of tech space. And so that should make a savvy investor really excited about tackling this problem.
Well, that's a good point. In the last few minutes that we have here today, what else should we cover that we haven't?
The biggest thing to really think about when attacking this space is a couple things. What is the moat that someone has in their business? And what are the other players that are out there in the space? And for us, we look at there are a handful of large wine retailers that are out there digitally. Wine.com, Wine Library, there's a handful of them. Those are great e-commerce sites. And many of those are our top prospects for actually getting their inventory on our platform. And so that is a really interesting shift in the way that wine is thought about, purchased, distributed, etc. And when you see how people consume wine and what groups make the buying decisions here, it's actually quite fascinating. So one little tidbit I'll leave the audience with is men versus women, when it comes to the consumption of wine, those groups are very, very different. So for instance, women start drinking wine at an income level of between $50,000 and $80,000. That's sort of the entry point of income relative to when they start drinking wine. For men, it's closer to $250,000 because men traditionally drink beer, right? So you have a very different buying habit, and it's not until men start making a significant or above average income do they start consuming wine. However, women start consuming it at a much lower income. That's what they gravitate towards as far as a beverage. Now, it gets even more interesting when you kind of build from there. But what I found the most interesting was how these two groups thought about this commodity, this product versus the other. So women tend to drink wine, meaning they will buy 2 or 3 bottles in a particular week. That the price range there from $40 to $60, so they're moderately priced, and they tend to open it and consume it immediately. Men, because they wait so much longer to get into wine, tend to be collectors and hoarders and tend to go much more upmarket when it comes to wine. So when they get into wine, they tend to get in at a much higher price point, typically $100, $120 a bottle and above. It is really interesting to see those dynamics. And from a marketing perspective, you really have 2 different buckets that you have to approach and have to have that conversation with customers about.
Well, it's quite interesting. I wasn't aware of the difference between the two, but that makes sense for sure. So how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
Yeah, the best way is to either go through 10 Capital and reach out through you guys, or you can reach out directly, Pierre, Pierre, at Yahyn, that's YAHYN.com. Just shoot me an email that way, or you can check out Yahyn.com as well.
Great. We'll put that in the show notes. Want to thank you for joining us today for this update and hope to have you back for a follow-up again soon.
Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org.
Yahyn Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for the basis of investment decisions.